I never want the players to earn the right to have fun. They should have fun from the very first thing they do.
Welcome to the Gopherwood Lounge. I am DJ Butler, ArcPress Senior Editor, and before we get to introducing our guests, let me remind you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share in social media, and all of the things you know very well. So I'm here back today with Sandy Petersen and Matt Bockholt, and by way of brief reintroduction, Matt had recently published a novel called Bloom, which you can't find in the ordinary places right now.
No.
You want to say a word about where it can be found?
Yeah, you can actually purchase the EPUB directly from my own website. It's called fablevine.com. So you can go there and purchase it directly and then use whatever e-reader you prefer to read it.
Fantastic, fantastic. And we're here with, and Matt's got some game design background.
Yep.
And of course, Sandy Petersen, the legendary Sandy Petersen, has a fantastic amount of game design background. And so, Sandy, welcome back to the show.
You bet.
I would love to, this is what I love to talk about is games, actually. So I'll say this. I have a little bit of game design. I've been a gamer. I love board games. Love tabletop role-playing games. Those are my two sort of, I've done the most in those. With my board gaming group in Idaho, at a certain point, I decided that I wanted to make up my own board games, and so we would once every couple months have like a prototype night, and people would like bring prototypes they'd kludge together by drawing maps on kitchen towels and all the components made out of craft store pieces. So what I've done has been done with zero theory. I'd love to talk to you guys and talk about what are your sort of key ideas for game design. What do you think about when you go into designing a game? Where do you start? What are your key considerations?
Well, I start kind of in the same way that I start a story, which is if you think of the players as characters in a story, what's most interesting to me is meaningful choices. And so giving the players something that they can do where they are deciding whether they go this way or that way, what they're going to gamble, what strategy they want to use, that they can then see the effect of, whether that's positive or negative, leads to more meaningful choice. And for me, I think that is a key fundamental of enjoyable game design.
Interesting. Sandy, do you find you've designed a lot of games?
I've designed a lot of games.
Do you usually start knowing what the sort of theme of the game is, or do you start from the mechanics end? How do you get into a game project?
So I always know what the theme of the game is, because during the years from 1980 to 2011, with one exception, every game I designed, the topic of it was assigned to me by some higher up at the company. Okay, the man told me what to design.
Yep.
And I'm not complaining. The man treated me well, and he's got the money, he gets a pick. So I always had to find something in the game to kind of hang my hat on that would be cool.
Yep.
So he'd say, okay, Sandy, you have to do a game that is Pirates but Diablo. So that's actually a game I was assigned to design. It never came out for reasons that had nothing to do with me. But so I looked at everything about pirates I could. So I actually know a ton about pirates because I researched for this game. But what I do, what I do is I always go with theme. To answer your question, I do not go with the rules. With a board game, it's very slightly different in that one of the first things I do trying to get my handle on the game is I start writing the rules. And these rules are going to change massively through the game. But if I have that little network of rules, know what I'm doing, then that helps me put the theme in. So with, not every designer works this way. Being a game designer isn't like this human critical ability we all must do the same way. There's probably hundreds of ways to design a game. My way is theme. Reiner Knizia does the rule system first and then slaps on a theme, and he has great games. I love Reiner Knizia's games, but I can't do it that way. So like when
they all kind of feel the same a bit.
He has 4 or 5 different games.
There's like an auction component inside somewhere.
There's an auction or there's but with me, like when I did call the game Cthulhu Wars, first off, I was starting to do the factions, and I didn't just do one faction to test it out. I did all the 4 factions and had them be asymmetrical right from the start.
Yeah.
And because I want to have the guy playing the game feel like he's in that world.
Now, there's no human faction in this game.
Every single faction has humans because you all start with a bunch of cultists around a campfire.
Right. But there's
red
no
shirts.
good guys. The factions are, I'm Cthulhu or I'm Yogg
No,
Sothoth.
your faction is the good guys.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, no, it's not. It's not about fighting off Cthulhu. It's about you clearing off the earth like you promised in all the Lovecraft stories. And these other guys are jerks, and you're going to rule it. And I've never heard anyone complain about there not being humans. There is technically a way for humans to win in Cthulhu Wars, which is that if someone if someone ends the game, and none of the factions have 6 spell books yet, you're not allowed to win if you don't have 6 spell books.
Oh, I see.
All 6 spell books. So, which you earn during the game, they're like a video game achievement. Like you get one, then you keep it the rest of the game. And if no one has 6 and the game ends, then you all lose and the humans get to win.
Yeah.
So in the 12 years since I started working on this game, it has happened twice that I've seen.
That's fantastic.
So it's not very easy for the humans to win, but technically it's possible.
Yeah, it's
great.
that's interesting. So I don't know if you've played this, but the Jonathan Stranger Mr. Norrell board game has a feature like that. It's not a cooperative game. You are trying to win, but all of the players can fail to defeat the gentleman with the thistle down hair, and then you lose. He takes over, right? So there is an everybody loses possibility.
Like I said, it's not a very likely possibility in Cthulhu Wars. So
Yeah.
And if I want to have the everyone lose thing, I have my game Planet Apocalypse based on on a combination of Doom and the Book of Revelation, where it's co-op. So you're all on the same team. So that way you can all lose together, and they do a lot because it's one of the hardest co-op games out there, one of the most challenging.
Yeah.
But it's basically you get soldiers and you shoot the monsters, and it's I think what makes it appeal to people. It's actually my other big game, called Cthulhu Wars. Again, I tried to steep it in the theme. It's the demon apocalypse, and the monsters are based on medieval concepts, not really like Doom. So there's these bizarre looking. There's like one monster that looks like a demon with horns and hoofs. All the rest are these crazy medieval things like Hieronymus Bosch, and you have this sense of doom as the monsters are advancing, and the map board starts out logical and in the human thing, and gets more and more distorted as you go towards the demons. And the humans themselves are like these damaged people with flaws, and some of them are missing like a hand or something. They have amputees because it's been so hard to survive. But it's also a tower defense game as well as combat, so that's kind of unusual board game. So that kind of appeals to them, and I did that again. Start with the theme.
Yep.
So in the rules itself, every rules chapter starts with a quote, to kind of reinforce the theme.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, because once you have the theme down, you can kind of decide what kind of rules you want to make that theme feel real and alive. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can react it however you want. So like Cthulhu Wars, all through the rules, it's done straight. This is the end of the world and these awful monsters. But when you see people playing, they're laughing and making jabs at each other and they aren't sitting there being all spooked out. They're like, this is super fun. And that's what I want to say. The same is true of Call of Cthulhu, which is about like aliens, it's a horror story.
Yeah.
The players doing it, sometimes they're creeped out, but a lot of the time they're just laughing at each other.
Yep.
This is you walked into your Nyarlathotep's house, dude. How could you, and he's like, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And so that's the thing. It's about having fun. And so I think having a strong theme makes it more fun. So I'm doing the game, when I did the game Doom, I tried to have the maps seem like have that fun, have the creepy stuff going in. So I got the artist to draw like the really creepy wall textures of like demon faces. I put this near something bad. So the players would I'm near something, they'd know something bad was around because they had the creepy texture. And they'd be all freaked out. And that, made it more fun, I felt.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love theme too. I'm speaking as as a player of games. It's sort of why I never win, like in not about role playing games, but in like a board game or something, right? Because I'm sitting here thinking, aha, I am the Lord Marshal of Austria in 1804. How fun is this? And my son is doing the math in his head, right? And he knows exactly what the odds are. And I don't. For me, everything becomes a kind of a role play. I love it. it means I can be good, but usually I'm not the most likely one to win because I'm making decisions that the sort of the role played character would delight in, not necessarily in my head, not necessarily I'm making the highest percentage and taking the highest percentage shots in terms of outcomes.
You're turning every board game into a TTRPG where everyone else is doing the math.
Design. And here's why. Let me give you an example from one of my games. I'm not praising myself. Well, I am kind of a little bit. But so I did this game called The Gods' War, which is the foundation myth of the world of Glorantha. Okay. In it, you play an elemental faction. So you might be like...
Storm.
Storm is one of the factions.
Yeah.
Okay. And so in this, the Storm King... the Storm is played is this powerful guy, good in combat. He's got these weird distortions. But a friend of mine, Ken Ralston, who actually wrote the script in the background for the game Oblivion, so he has some chops too. And so I said, here, why don't you play Orlanth? You'll figure it out easy. So Ken goes, okay. So Ken came back afterwards and says, I won. I said, you won the first time you played it? He goes, yeah. I says, how'd you do that? And he says, well, I didn't know anything about how the game rules worked. I didn't know anything about what was going on, but I said, I remember the Orlanth, the storm god in the world of Glorantha, is kind of a bully. So I played him like a bully. I went in there and I didn't count the cost and I would beat up guys and do this thing. And it turns out that's exactly the right way to play him.
Yeah. And
I won. I said, yeah, that's how you play him. And if you're playing Darkness, you're like this backstabbing, sneaky thing that kind of goes in and takes advantage of people's weakness. And everyone has, if you're playing Cthulhu Wars, same thing applies. If you're playing Cthulhu in Cthulhu Wars, you want to play him like he's the apex predator and he's not afraid of getting hit, And Nyarlathotep was more of a scavenger, hitting them when they're down, And a black goat plays it like a fungus infection that keeps growing and it's hard to extirpate. And everyone if you play it if you have the game set up so that playing that role is good, you still have to do some math, There's still obviously mistakes you can make, but having someone come to me, which they did, and tell me that, yeah, when I played Cthulhu, I felt like the apex predator. That's what rewards me as a designer, that they got that. Because although I don't write fiction books, okay, to most of my dad's dismay, I kind of get some of the same appeal because someone plays one of my games, Planet Apocalypse or Cthulhu Wars or Civilization. They're writing their own story, and enjoying it. They go, and so game stories are fun. Come back with. Role-playing games are the most advanced version of that. You get a story in your role-playing game, but you can do it in the board game too.
Yeah, no, I love that, and to maybe synthesize that or kind of articulate it a little differently, I love it when in a game I am making the kinds of decisions that the game faction, in fact, should be making, and when I'm rewarded for making what would be good decisions for the game faction or for the player that I'm playing.
Good for you.
Yeah, that's the fun thing about asymmetrical game design.
Asymmetrical games.
Everyone's kind of playing by different rules.
Everyone loves asymmetrical stuff, right?
Yeah.
But another thing I found out when I started doing asymmetrical, I started with God's War, and then I did it in Planet Apocalypse. Now I always do it, which is instead of just giving, like it's common in an asymmetrical game to give a faction some kind of perk.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you get this bonus.
Yep.
And you get this bonus. I started giving them a faction flaw. Weakness, like something that sucked. So in Planet Apocalypse, I have a character who's a doctor whose bonus is he heals more when he tries to do first aid, and his flaw is he's a drug addict, and if he has more than one courage at the end of a turn, he loses one. So he wants to spend it before the end of the turn, and what I found was that players they owned that flaw. They're like, oh, I see how this works, and that had a big effect on the play as the bonuses, but no one ever complained about it. They said, "Yep, that's my guy. I got this flaw."
Yeah.
Like for example, Orlanth in the game as a Storm King, his advantage was kinship. At the start of the turn, he could choose to either have 2 power or 1 victory point. He picked someone to be his kin. Any other player, and then he either gets 2 victory points or 1 victory point, whichever one 2 power or 1 victory point, and whichever one he doesn't take, the other guy gets. So he picks to help someone else every turn. Now that's his bonus, but his flaw is he's honorable. So if he attacks someone who's out of power and can't respond, then he loses a victory point. Like, it costs him more. So he's like, "Oh, I'm honorable. That sucks. Why don't you go kick back when he's down?" Well, I'm honorable, and the players dug that.
Yeah.
And finding out they like having weaknesses as much as, and I thought about it. It makes sense in a fiction work. Nobody wants a Mary Sue, right?
Yeah, that's why I think they're very similar.
Yeah.
Writing stories and writing games they share a lot of the same strengths and weaknesses. And
100%. I love asymmetrical games. I love board games where I think we're sort of talking about not necessarily role playing games here, but where the powers all develop asymmetrically. Okay, something like Twilight. I'm actually playing Twilight Imperium on Saturday because my daughter, I'm very excited about this. She says her boyfriend wants to kick my butt in Twilight Imperium.
Dude, so it's like a 10-hour game.
It is. We're setting up an 8-player game in my house Saturday, 10 a.m., bringing a bunch of treats, right? The whole thing. Everyone in that game starts differently because every faction has abilities and to some extent
I've played
limitations.
I'm very familiar with Twilight Imperium.
But also you develop asymmetrically because people are choosing technologies or they're finding artifacts or capturing planets that give them bonuses. So that by about a third of the way through the game, everyone's an extremely different. One of the things you're trying to remember is, okay, which of these guys is the one that puts down his own, wormholes? Which is one of these is the guy who can, declare a treaty on a planet and force me to stop and because you're not only remembering your own abilities, but you're dealing with, in this case, 7 other players who become very different over the course of the game.
And it can become very difficult to even tell who's winning it, though, at that point, which is, I think, a wonderful advantage of that kind of game where you're just playing the best that you can and not worrying about getting too much into the crunchy math where you're like, I need to do exactly this to counter that and that. At some point, there's just so much going on that you just have to worry about what you're doing and make the best choices you can.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Sandy, I want to hear about Doom. We've been talking a lot about...
So while I'm thinking of this, I'm typing a note.
Okay.
To my son because you talked about Twilight Imperium.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's kind of a sore point with me. I love Twilight Imperium, but it takes forever to play.
It does.
And this other flaw is that you can't tell what your faction really can do unless you've played the game multiple times.
Yes, you have to. Yes.
You have to figure it out. Like if you're playing the bugs, you don't realize that what you need to do is never ever build a single ship except for transports and just build those stupid land cannons on the planet and go through the galaxy with those.
Yeah.
That's what you need to do.
Yep.
Right. And it's more complicated than that, but not incredibly. I'll remember this later on, but not incredibly. So in response to hyperspace, to Twilight Imperium, I did a game called Hyperspace.
Okay, tell us about that.
Okay, so this is the sad truth. Hyperspace is completely printed and collated and finished and shrink wrapped and sitting in crates in China.
Oh boy.
Okay, so I'm waiting for the trade war to die down to see what happens with it. Okay.
Okay.
It's all paid for even, so I own it. But here's the thing about Hyperspace. I packed away my copy of it, or destroyed my playtest copy. Oh, so first let's go into game design.
Okay.
Because I design asymmetrical games, and I learned this from working on video games. I learned a lot working on video games. I learned that the way to do an asymmetrical game is you playtest the bejesus out of your game.
Yeah.
You playtest constantly, and after every single test, you make little adjustments.
Yep.
And you keep doing this, and it can take a long time. At Ensemble Studio is doing the Age of Empire series, which was asymmetrical.
Yep.
Not as asymmetrical as Cthulhu Wars, but there was asymmetry. We would do this for years. I remember going to the Game Developers Conference, GDC, with a buddy of mine, and the guys up there were talking about how they were doing Red Alert, and you have to and they said you must playtest your games a lot, and me and my buddy are like, yeah, that's right. He's actually my protege. Yeah, you have to playtest a lot. You have to play it more than you think you do. And we go, yeah, we have. We had to playtest our game for 3 whole months, and we burst into laughter because we had been playtesting our game for 18 months at that time. Okay, I mean, I guess theirs is easier to playtest. But so Cthulhu Wars, I was playtesting it for years. All these games I playtest and playtest and playtest.
Yeah.
I watched the playtests, and here's 2 fun facts about playtests.
Yeah.
Playtesters, with rare exceptions, don't know how to fix the game. They do know what's wrong, and they'll make a suggestion and just ignore their suggestion. And do what you need to fix it. They'll say,
Yeah.
well, I felt slow moving at the start with this civ. I think you should speed up our guys. And what I hear is it's slow moving to the start, and then I work out how to fix that. And it's usually not speeding up the guys. Okay. And the other thing I learned is that teenagers can't give any useful feedback. Okay. Preteens can. Adults, college, and older
super
can.
interesting.
Teens can't do it. I don't know what happens to them. Again, rare exceptions, but like, what did you think of this? It was good. It's like you get nothing from these guys. So those are the 2 fun facts I got. And we did a lot of testing with teens because Microsoft thought that'd be a good way of seeing how their games worked, and they were absolutely valueless. Now, if you watch them, you can see what they do and learn from that. Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe they were totally valueless, but the interviews afterwards were.
Right.
Were not
But
helpful.
anyway, going back
Their
to hyperspace, what I wanted to do was do a 4X game like
Okay.
Twilight Imperium, which is expand, exterminate,
Explore.
experiment, and explore.
Yeah.
Okay, but I wanted to do it in like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Okay, and have asymmetrical, and that's what hyperspace is.
Yeah.
You play super bizarre aliens, and you have a number of different advantages for every civ, and also every civ has a flaw. So like, and one of the other features is that because Lovecraft's monsters are actually aliens, I put Lovecraft guys in it. So there's 25 different aliens.
Yeah.
Okay, but 5 of them are Lovecraftian. 6 if
funny.
you count humans, which I don't. But so like the Star Spawn are one of the races, and their flaw is they have to periodically sleep because that's what Cthulhu spends a lot of his time doing. So it's like, okay, this turn I'm sleeping, and that's like this disadvantage they have.
Yeah.
But it's trying to give. So I've had some reviews because we sent out 40 copies to reviewers.
Yeah.
And the feedback I got was that I'd succeed. I love it when I get reviews that tell me I succeeded. They said, yeah, it's the full 4X experience, but in an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then you're ready to play another game. So I kind of like that because you can't play Twilight Imperium in an evening.
That's part of a game night, right?
It's
if
part of a
play
game
2
night.
or 3 games,
It's an
it doesn't happen.
epic
Game
thing.
day, at
You
least.
clear
And,
the Saturday, and
yeah.
it's the whole day.
Right.
Yeah, you have to have a committed.
Yes.
We haven't played in a little while. I actually have a Twilight Imperium kind of tournament group. We have one of the guys 3D printed a model.
What I was
trophy.
what I was writing to my son here just now when I stopped is I'm going to see if I can get a couple copies of the game sent here from China,
Oh, fun.
and then like if you guys want to try it out.
Oh, I'd
An
love
hour and a half
love to.
hyperspace game. I think you
Absolutely.
might find fun. Now, this isn't the version with the plastic figures I promised the backers.
Yeah,
That's still coming, but this
Yeah.
will help bootstrap us up to that.
with counters or
Yeah, yeah.
meeples or something.
It actually has cardboard things that you fit together to,
Oh, yeah.
to make like crosswise to make this stuff.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
3D, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and when we first did the Kickstarter, there was 24 civs and the secret final civ, and the secret final civ turned out to be humans and nothing. And
That's funny.
but that also was another principle of my game design, which applies to asymmetrical games, which are not about humans, which is that I never want to have the humans be the vanilla civ. That's what they always do. Humans are good in diplomacy, or they're Democrats or something. I don't mean
just
Democrat in
average
the political
everywhere.
thing. They're average, or yeah. But I said no, humans are super weird, and so I always had the humans be these bizarre things, and then of course like the humans are being like, I don't want to be a human. They're like, I want to be a human. So in hyperspace, for example, the backstory is Cthulhu's taken over Earth and kicked us off. So like Cthulhu's homeworld looks like Earth.
Yeah.
And the humans had to flee in these big generation ships.
Yeah.
Okay, so our homeworld is like a rock with no resources. That's our disadvantage. We don't have a home, but we have this fleet, these generation ships full of power. So when the humans are there, all the other civs are looking at the humans and, holy crap, look at that fleet. They're like dangerous, and they're all afraid of the humans, which of course the human player loves. And then you see the other players forming like an anti-human alliance early on in the game, which is also super fun to see, and it makes the humans be unusual. And that's something I like in my science fiction stuff.
Yeah.
I'm doing a role-playing game now based in the hyperspace universe because I like it so much, called Hyperspace.
Oh, okay.
And I'm running a campaign with it, and in fact, Friday was our next game night, and They will be in an underground lair under a giant wrecked robot with amphibious aliens coming in through the underground to try to knock out the fusion plants. Meanwhile, the crystal aliens that control that own the robot the players are kind of trying to help them. But one of the features of this game is that every alien race has different stats, and I don't mean different stats like their strength is bigger. I mean like they have a stat of ego, and humans don't have that stat.
Right.
Yeah.
These guys have a stat of core.
It's like a unique resource.
Yeah, and humans have this stat of will. Aliens. Right? So you feel like you're really someone unusual, which I think is it makes it harder to design the aliens, but I think makes them more interesting.
Yeah.
Because that blew me away in RuneQuest.
Yeah.
When I started playing, I played D&D where like the advantage of a dwarf is that, well, he doesn't really have an advantage. He's just a dwarf. I guess he has dark side or something. You know.
Sure.
Yep.
It has but in RuneQuest, like the dwarf rolls different dice for his strength and size.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. It's like he has different stats. He feels like a different thing. So I just carried it to his logical extreme in hyperspace.
Yeah, I think this has been true in Traveler too, right? Is like, for example, the what is it? Humans use social standing, but like the Vargar don't have that. They have charisma because they have like a pack dynamic.
Yeah.
Rather than like
Well, I
class
got
doesn't matter.
I played Traveler back in the 70s when it didn't even have non-humans.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
did recently play it with Seth Skorkowski, the
fun.
modern version of it. And here's a pro tip for playing a game you don't know anything about. I said, okay, so I'm playing this Traveler game. He said, yeah, and here's these 500 pages of background material. I said, you know what, Seth? I'm going to come from a primitive planet cut off from the galaxy, so I don't know any of this stuff. And it all could be, and he said, that's a brilliant idea. I said, yeah, see, I'm thinking. So I didn't have to learn that stuff. I could just be my guy.
Yeah.
And,
That's awesome. I had a player in a campaign who did exactly the same thing. He designed and proposed to me rules for creating a character from a ignorant barbarian backwater planet, so he didn't have to read all of the setting material.
well, my experience is that if you're in a role-playing game, the best guy to be if you don't want to learn the background ahead of time, and even if you don't get it right, is either be the equivalent of a caveman or a sophisticated city person, because neither of those knows anything about how the world works.
It's very funny.
Either below it or above it.
So tell me about the role of randomness in games, right? We
Okay, so here's the thing: there's a faction of Eurogamers that thinks there should be no randomness.
should be
in the
all be
game.
like chess.
Yeah, it's really no randomness. Okay, so I've had people say, "Hey, look, you could do this rule in Cthulhu Wars, so you don't have to roll dice."
Which obviously you can get rid of randomness and still have a successful game, right? That's been done. But
modern art, modern art has randomness because you draw your cards random.
I mean, just like chess, right? There's no randomness in chess.
No randomness in chess.
Sure.
Unless you count
Or
the
go,
coin flip
or
who goes first.
Sure.
Or you could sharply control randomness, right? So something like, hey, we have a deck of 12
Go
cards.
doesn't have
and-
randomness.
Yep.
There was a game of the Pacific War, I think called Carrier, that came out in the 80s that had no randomness in combat.
Yeah.
So it can definitely be done. It's not like it's a negative if your
it can
game has
absolutely be done.
Has
So what
has
do
no
you think about
randomness.
it, though? What is,
I like
But
having
I like
randomness.
it.
I think it adds
But
to
I
the
also
fun.
like too much random. Yeah, it's very much a
Yes,
personal
you
thing.
could
Too
also-
much randomness,
you could also be
and then
Candyland,
you're right, and then you're
which is all
Candyland.
random.
Sure.
Okay.
And you have no control over whether you win or lose or what you
Candyland
do.
isn't fun, right? Because there's no control. And then you can the opposite extreme, or Chutes and Ladders is all random, right?
Yep.
On the other hand, Tic Tac Toe is totally non-random, and it also sucks for an adult.
Right.
Yep.
You always
Absolutely.
end up in a stalemate.
Well,
every
unless you make a
time.
mistake.
Yeah.
Or,
right.
or you're playing with someone who doesn't know the rules.
You know, I once
Yeah.
played Tic Tac Toe against a chicken.
Yeah.
They had a chicken trained to play Tic Tac Toe.
That's
And you
fantastic.
could not beat the chicken.
That's
it was
awesome.
perfect. So
Was
any
this
game
in
that
Japan?
a chicken can it was in America at a state fair.
Okay.
So a game that a chicken can master is not necessarily a game that I feel proud about. So
Right.
then I tried making mistakes, see if it win. It absolutely took advantage of every mistake and won. Anyway, but the thing is, so I answered these guys saying you could take out the randomness. I said, you know what? I like the randomness. I think it's fun. I like rolling a whole bunch of dice and then like, oh man, I didn't get a single kill. Or and then like that adds to the fun for me. The game is still mostly non-random because if you have, and of course, the other contradictory thing is the more randomness you have in a game, then the less randomness you have because it evens out, unless you're supremely unlucky. So, for example, one of the reasons that I think I think there's actually less randomness in hyperspace than in Twilight Imperium, and not a ton less. Is that Twilight Imperium, there tends to not be very many battles. And when there is a battle, it's this huge critical thing, and it ruins you, right? In hyperspace, you're fighting constantly. There's all kinds of little fights, and so it evens out over time.
Yeah.
And you never have one giant battle that you're destroying. That was purposely, that you never have one giant battle that ruins you. And if you have one giant battle that seems to ruin you, usually you can recover in a turn or two, and keep on going. It's like, it's really hard to exterminate someone in hyperspace.
Yeah.
And of course, his motivation is to not do it, because if I spend all my time killing you, then who's going to profit from that? He is.
Yep.
So, but yeah. So I'd use the randomness as a fun factor, so the players will be like, oh, I hope I get this thing. And then of course, after the game, they have war stories. Remember when I got 3 hits on only 4 dice? That was so cool.
Yeah.
Remember when you rolled your giant thing and spent all your courage to get this huge attack on the Demon Lord, and you completely fluffed, and he goes, oh man, I remember that. And then everyone's like talking smack about the guy, making up stories about his mom, and that's fun. So to me, the randomness, you don't have to have a random game. You shouldn't have a wholly random game, but randomness can be fun. There's a reason that gambling appeals to people, and part of it's the randomness.
Yeah.
There's also a reason that like roulette is not as cool as poker, because poker isn't completely random.
Right. You have choices, and
Poker
and
is
you
one of
can
the least random games there is.
Exactly.
The starting situation is different.
And you can do that exact same kind of thing with board game design, where you have a randomness, but it's controlled to some degree. If you're playing with like deck-based games, where it's like I have 7 cards, they're randomly chosen for me, but I have some choice on how to deal with the randomness given to me.
I'm working on a game right now called Death Dealer.
Yeah.
And in this game, it's asymmetrical, but it's different from any other game I've done, because you don't start asymmetrical. You start, every civ is, you design your asymmetries to go. And the way you design it is you have these abilities that you get that you can research.
Yeah.
And you start with one free one, and there's like 80 or 100 different abilities in the game, and they're all unique. So if you get reinforced concrete, no one else can have that. Okay? If you get bat wings, no one else has bat wings.
Yep.
So you start with a bunch of these cards, and you're like, some of the cards are synergistically good for you, and some of them are like antagonistic and they're bad. You have to kind of figure it out. But your situation is different, and working out how to use them. So there's a randomness there as you build your civ, but it's not completely random, because you decide what you do.
Yeah, you can take decisions to ameliorate. When you know where the randomness is, you can take decisions. I mean, there's lots of examples, right? Something like Robo Rally, where there's a lot of randomness because you're interacting with the other characters.
In theory, there's no randomness, right?
In theory, none. Right. In practice,
there's a lot.
Every other player induces a random element all the time. You're getting pushed off, or just the speed, right? You're forced to quickly decide, and oops, I drove off the board. But the ability to sort of pick technologies on your robot to sort of help ameliorate, right?
Another real bonus of adding random elements to a game is it increases replayability among the same cohort. So even if you are playing against someone who is vastly more strategic than you, if you were playing chess, you're not going to want to play with them more than once or twice before they're just always going to win. But if you have some randomness in there, that that there's always a chance,
then
right?
You got a shot.
You got a shot.
To get randomness other ways. Let me give you an example from my hyperspace game.
Yeah.
So in hyperspace, the way it works is that every spaceship, everything that can fight, has a defense factor and an attack factor, and the attack factor is always a dice. So, like for example, a starbase has a defense of 6 and an attack of 1d6.
Okay.
A cruiser has a defense of 10 and an attack of 1d10. A destroyer is a defense of 8 and an attack of 1d8. A corvette, the littlest thing, kind of like a fighter, has an attack of a d6 but a defense only of 2. So it's like easy to kill.
Destroyed.
Yeah. So what happens when you go into combat? You go into combat and you roll all the wacky colored dice, because that's fun.
Yep.
Okay. And then, so that's random, the result you get. But then what you do is you add up your total number, and you then apply it to the other guy's defenses. So if I have a score of 15, I can say, if I put 8 of this on his destroyer, it'll destroy it. Yeah. Then I have 7 left over. I can destroy a starbase, but I can't knock out his cruiser. because it costs 8. So you're deciding where to apply it, and that's not random, but the amount you get is random.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the players are making these interesting decisions, like, oh man, I only can kill one of his things. Well, I could kill this unit here, or I can kill all 4 of his corvettes. Which is better for me? And you have to make this interesting decision based on randomness, but still leading to, you don't just count numbers up. You're like trying to figure out how to apply it.
And that other player is sitting there going, please don't destroy my starbase. Please
Yeah,
don't.
and they're like, but what they're saying is, yeah, I don't care about the starbase.
Right.
You know,
Right.
right?
I'm saying internally they're like,
Yeah. But they're doing the same thing to you at the same time, because you both rolled dice simultaneously.
Yeah.
And they're both applying the damage in an interesting way, which is random but not totally.
yep.
Yeah, I think an element of, I mean, to me, right? And again, fundamentally, any game I play, I'm always sort of in my head role playing. So I'm not a great gamer for this reason. I'm not a high percentage winner. But like for me, the randomness contributes an element of verisimilitude. Like sometimes things don't work in my life, and I think they should.
There's that too.
Right.
Yep.
And so like I just got unlucky, right? Which you know, I had to sort of feel it. I feel like this is weirdly, I'm moving plastic models around and hurling giant piles of dice, but I kind of have to feel like this is a real thing
It's immersion
to care. Yeah.
in a weird sense.
Yeah. Sandy, I want to ask you, because we have not talked about very much, but Doom. I'd like to know. I mean, I was just kind of want to give you the mic and say, talk to us about Doom. I mean, how did you get into that? What was your role in that? How'd it go?
Microprose, my previous company,
Yeah.
that I worked at, was going under because the big boss had gone insane.
Okay.
And was doing crazy things like having his 15-year-old son be a game designer on an arcade game, and just pouring cups of Diet Coke over his vice president in a giant meeting with all the company there because he was jealous that we liked the vice president more than him.
Wow.
Okay? When I say going insane, I don't just mean it's
mean
not
legit.
figurative, right? So
Yeah.
So anyway, so I'm let go, and this buddy of mine from Microprose told me about this company in Texas that was looking for a designer. So I went there, and it turned out what had happened is they didn't like the previous designer. They did not tell me this until I learned this like a year later.
Yeah.
And they liked him so little that the programmers in the company, there's programmers, basically the basic, the 3 goddesses of computer games are designer, programmer, artist. But back in the day, the designer wasn't so clear that needed to be a thing. Maybe you just need programmers and artists. Okay, so the programmer said designers are bad. He was doing a bad job, and the artist said designers are good. We just didn't have the right designer for our project. So they kept bringing in artists to try to be their level designers. Okay, and we didn't even know the name level designer then. It was just designer, because I was one of the first guys to ever be a level designer. We didn't even But then the artists finally imposed upon the programmers to bring in one designer, and they'd seen my resume, which was not what it is now, but it was still pretty good. You know, I'd done a bunch of computer games at Microprose. You know, I'd worked on Civilization. I'd done tabletop games. I'd worked on the original version of Arkham Horror, all that kind of stuff. So if anyone's a designer, it's got to be this guy. Let's try him out. So they bring me in. And immediately I started building a level for him. And the previous artist he'd taken their level design tool and he had made a spiral staircase. And that's the full thing he'd done with them. And I started making a level that was raising and lowering floors with acid, and there was tricks, and there was a monster, and there's all this stuff. And I didn't know what had happened before me. I just I'll just make a level, like a dungeon crawl, because I'd done plenty of dungeon crawls. And they loved me, and they hired me. And then they said, well, we have to have all these levels for Doom, and you're it. And so we have these levels already done. So I had to do, there's 27 levels in Doom. I had to do 20 of them. So I did all the levels or changed them up from the previous designer for episode 2 and episode 3, and 2 of the levels on episode 1. And the rest was... the other ones in episode 1 were John Romero. So then they decided they liked designers, and they'd also found that out at Microprose. At Microprose, they had the idea originally that the proper way to do a game is you have an awesome programmer who can also design, like Sid Meier, and then he does all the work. But there's some programmers who can't design, so we'll have designers as like a crutch for those guys. But of course, what happened is Sid Meier, their like the platonic ideal of the designer programmer, like he immediately took one of the designers and worked with them constantly and wanted to have a designer. So it turned out that to make a really good game, you programmers, of course, do some design. Okay, the game's better the more design they can do. It's also true of the artist. The more design the artist can do, the better. The designer is the guy that only does design, unless you don't count scripting as design. But it's all of that together makes it a better game. But they're different. The programmer's making it run fast, and the artist's making it look good, and then the designers and they're making it fun. And at id, I learned a lot, and got to use a lot of my make dungeon chops, and I would do things like and also stuff from Call of Cthulhu. For example, one of my signature moves in Doom Notorious was the player would go into a room and there'd be like a pillar in the middle of the room with spotlights on it, and like a BFG or a Super Ball or some cool thing they really wanted. The players look at that and say, they know if they go get that, all hell's going to break loose.
Yep.
And they're like, oh, I know he's going to kill me if I go for that, but I got to do it. And then they go in there, and of course they get killed. But they didn't blame me. They said, I knew it was going to happen. So some of the designers, they would just teleport a monster in behind them as a surprise. I never did that. There's always a hint in mine. There's always some clue, and I got that from horror stories and D&D.
Yeah, fantastic. So you've also done what haven't we talked about? You've done card games. No, you haven't done card games.
That's the one thing I haven't done. Done board games, done role-playing games, done computer games.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. So we've been talking about role-playing game design. Like, I guess to what extent across these different types of games are the objectives different? Like, what are the outcomes you're looking for in a game? What are you trying to do for the players?
Is there any objective other than fun with games? I mean, everything else adds to that, but
well, there's fun. And there's fairness, I think, in a role-playing game. One of the things in a role-playing game is there's no game balance. Like, you don't have to make the monster. Like, what does that mean? The players don't lose too often? But there is.
Right.
If you have different classes for your characters, like in D&D,
sure,
then you have to make sure they feel even.
Yeah.
So that if you pick a priest instead of a warlock, you don't feel like, oh, warlocks get all the breaks. Now, I avoided this almost completely with my role-playing games because they don't have that in Call of Cthulhu. You're not born to be an accountant. You just that's your guy's job in the game.
Yeah.
So I kind of got away with it.
Yeah, I guess you could say is your intention to create cooperative moments, because then you have your different classes that work well together, or is it more competitive, where then kind of a fairness among the classes is more important, because you don't want to feel like you lost because you chose this character or this race or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Well, I always think it's more fun in a role-playing game to work as a team, and also in a co-op game. So like in my Planet Apocalypse game, every character has all these abilities that force them to interact with other characters. So like, for example, a simple one that everyone can do, first aid is one of their actions. You can do any number of actions on your turn, but only one of each action. So normally, you move, that's an action. You fight, that's an action. You do first aid. Yeah. And if you have multiple guys, you can do first aid in yourself. But if you have multiple guys in an area, like if one guy's hurt really bad, they can all first aid him. So it's kind of a consideration. And then another thing you can do is a lot of people you can spend courage, that's like the currency of the game, on other people's things if you're there with him. Or there's one character, she's this inspiring girl based on my niece, who, like, if you start the turn in her area, you get an extra courage. So everyone kind of wants to, where's she going? Where's Dorothy going? I want to go be in her area to get that courage. So you see people making decisions based on other people's stuff. Or like in my game Death Dealer, which is completely like only one, it's zero sum. One person wins, everyone else loses. In that game, to research something, you have to give you pick the card you're going to do, and then you pay from 1 to 5 resources, but you don't pay him to the bank, you pay him to other players.
Yeah.
So if you're like playing 3 resources for your 4th thing, you're like, I'll give them all to this person because he's way behind. So you find yourself interacting with the players like every time you make a decision. And the more I think games are about having fun with other people, and so I do games where you're forced to interact and do things.
Yeah, I think another really fun way to do that is to combine the two, competitive and cooperative, to a coopetition type of game where you're working together to accomplish a goal, but also competing for points along the way. So there is one ultimate winner, but if you're not working together, you're all going to lose, kind of thing.
Well, I did a game called Orcs Must Die, a board game of that, and that's actually you can actually have teams. One team's the orcs, one team's the humans, and the orcs all win or all lose. Well, one of them is rated the best guy because he got, but you're totally cooperating with the other guys in your team, but you're totally against the other team. So it kind of, I mean, it's professional sports idea, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I love that too. I love some of the Euro games for me are like, okay, I can play this, but if I don't have the ability to go something like Princes of Florence, okay, if you played that, or Puerto Rico, where you're sort of
Puerto Rico, I know I've seen Princes of Florence, haven't played it.
You're kind of like you're competitively building your thing, but like you don't really interact.
You do not. It's multiplaire solo.
Yeah, I have no.
Feast for Odin's another game kind of like that.
Yeah,
I've played a lot of board games like that. That's actually.
Yeah, and so I always looking for ways. So one of the things I always do in my games is I try really hard to make it so that you can't turtle. So that the choice of I'll sit in my corner and build up my empire and not interact with people is a bad decision.
Is a losing strategy.
So in Cthulhu Wars, for example, there's factions that don't engage in direct combat, but they still have to mess with you or they're going to lose the game. And they mess with you in different ways.
Right.
You know, but they're messing with you, and you're like, you get mad at them, and then if you're a combat faction, you go and fight them.
You go and attack them.
And if you're not a combat faction, you mess with them back. But it's like in Cthulhu Wars, if you sit in the corner and build up, you are not rewarded. And in fact, I violated this rule when I made the faction the Chochos.
Yeah.
Because I said, you know what? I have all these different ways of playing the game. I think even though I don't like these factions, I'll have one faction which can turtle. And so I made the Chochos a turtle, and man, you can't believe the flack I got for that. And
that's funny.
Yeah, and
that's good though, because a lot of people do like to play in different ways, and so.
Well, some people play the Chochos every time, and they win because if you don't know about the Chochos, you don't know to go kick their butt every once in a while. Then they turtle and they win. Right, but you never leave Cthulhu alone. You never leave the Black Goat alone because you know they're going to be messing with you, and you have to go get on them.
Yeah.
But the Chochos didn't mess with you, so I guess I'm not going to worry about them. And then you have to. Yeah. So I had to eventually change their balance. But
I agree.
Serves me right.
I love the ability in a game to I love a game that forces players into direct conflict, whether that is something like Steam, where there's only so many ways in and out of the city. There's only so many resources. It's going to matter who can go first, and I'm going to cut you off, or something where you can literally attack them. Here's something I learned from Call of Cthulhu that I think that to me seems like a difference between a role-playing game and maybe not every board game, but I think maybe most board games.
I think they're pretty different. The genres, yeah.
So I'd been playing various kinds of role-playing games, but I'd never played. I can't remember for sure. I mean, I think we had D&D. We might have had some GURPS or whatever. RuneQuest. I had Call of Cthulhu, and I was utterly unfamiliar with the fiction, right? But like I realized, oh man, this is a game that can produce feelings in the players. Right? You can produce a feeling of dread. Like if you set this up well, you can change the physiological state of the players at the table, and
well, I think you can get joy or other also sorrow in other games too, right?
This is my point, right? Is afterwards I realized, in any role playing game, actually, there's an aspect that's more like a novel.
It's harder to get the same kind of dread because if you're facing a dragon in D&D and you know this thing's going to kill you,
right?
It's not the same kind of fear.
It's not, and you're like
being attacked by a lion is not the same as seeing a body crawl out of a grave and come after you.
Right.
It's a different kind of dread.
You didn't, right, and you didn't ride to the old mansion on a bus in a story set in your hometown, and right,
Yeah, exactly.
But that was sort of what that, and then afterwards I played Vampire the Masquerade, where I kind of did similar things, right? Where I said, oh, in a game you can I don't want to say emotionally manipulate, but you can interact with your players in a way that you're involving them in a story so they care about something, and then that something is at risk, and they feel tension about things, right? And so like in a novel, and it's because you have someone directing everybody else, right? I mean, the game master, I don't tell everyone what to do, but like I'm setting up the stakes and I'm putting in the secondary characters, and here's the plot of the story. And you can get the kind of sort of emotional experience with maybe catharsis, right? The release of the emotions in a role-playing game. Board game for me is not so much, right? It's fun, it's entertaining. I'm with my friends, I'm laughing, getting my butt kicked.
It also doesn't last for 24 sessions over the course of the next 2 years, so you're not.
That's also true.
You're not as wedded to the triumph of the star spawn species in the board game.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's interesting to me, and man, I'm going to make a gross generalization. It's interesting to me that in the video game space, we've moved towards more long-form storytelling, right? So it feels like we've moved that art towards that kind of experience where you can be like, oh, I can try to induce sort of emotional responses from the players, have them try and help them get attached to parts of the story or characters in the story, as opposed to something. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was Ultima. The early Ultima games were sort of maybe they were a pioneer in moving that way.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I wrote the backstory for Doom, which is like three sentences long. So you're
right.
I don't know if
I'm fine with that. And when I played World of Warcraft, I would never read those stupid books in the library giving me a history of the world. I said, nah, I just want to go do my quests.
Yeah, I don't know if
There's a place for both.
Yeah, I don't know if the industry has really changed that much actually, because I think it's always been around and it's still around, and maybe they're bigger.
Ultima had a backstory, and there's like
bigger games. But
after we did Doom, we saw Valve come out with Half-Life, which has a whole story.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's carried on, and we're like, whoa, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You don't have a backstory, but they do, and that was neat.
Yep.
And I think there's a place for a story if it makes it better. I think there's also a place like when I was playing Final Fantasy, I think it was 9, where like you'd have a cutscene, and then you'd go on a straight shot down this area with encounters, then have another cutscene, and I was like, I don't feel like I'm playing the game anymore. I'm not making decisions that matter. Because that's the fundamental for games for me, is you're trying to make interesting decisions that matter. So if you're playing Age of Empires, right at the start, you're sitting there with your 3 villagers in a town center, and you're making decisions. Do I scout for the berries?
Right.
Do I try to gather sheep? Do I build a house?
Right.
Immediately there's a choice. And in Doom, we do the same thing. There's immediately a choice. I always try to, I never want the players to earn the right to have fun. They should have fun from the very first thing they do. Now, it might be a different kind of fun than later on in the game.
Yeah, and there's, just like with books, you have, all these different genres that provide different types of entertainment for different types of audiences.
Oh, sure. But I'm not suggesting new games are better, old games are bad.
No. In fact, I'm actually saying I think those have been around forever. Like the Elder Scrolls has been that since early '90s, '80s, late '80s.
Well, yeah, I mean, the video games in the '80s and early '90s didn't have much of a backstory, but
some of them did. I mean, just depends on the game.
But a lot of them didn't. Like
yes,
Dungeon
a lot of them
Master,
didn't, and a lot of them still don't. Is my point.
Role-playing game of all time on the computer basically had no backstory. You just start in the dungeon with, anything you learn, you grow during it.
Yeah.
Whereas Ultima 3 had a whole backstory.
Exactly. Yeah.
Then you had the action adventures. Like King's Quest or Legion of Solitaire. Those actually had you were doing those
puzzle games,
Puzzle games,
Yep.
Yeah. I played a bunch of those Sierras games back in the, I guess it would have been early mid '80s, something like that.
My favorite, I can't think of the name of it, but you actually played the villain from the previous game in the series. You were a court jester that was villainous.
Oh, interesting.
And so he was a sardonic guy making fun of all the stuff around it.
That's funny.
And he was the former villain, and everyone remembered he was the villain in the game. So it was hilarious.
That's funny.
I remember one of the King's Quests where you got swallowed by a fish, and to get out, you had to have a feather, and you had to go walk up to the top of the tongue and type "tickle uvula"
Yep.
into the command bar to get it to spit you out.
I hated those things. I liked the point and click ones, but I did not like the typing in thing. Except
Oh man,
for,
I played all of those.
Except
So good.
for Day of the Tentacle.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I don't know that one.
Oh, so funny.
The Space Quest ones were hilarious.
They were pretty funny.
Oh man.
Yeah.
You could put you can put more humor into a game when there's a story.
See, but this is kind of one of those things where it's like there's not really a lot of interesting choice that you can make in those puzzle games because there's a specific solution to every puzzle you come across.
Yeah.
So the comedy along the way is,
Yep. And so that's kind of my point is that you can really do anything with a game. It's all about the execution there. And it's the same with writing. You can have a story where the characters don't make interesting choices, where things just happen to them, which is oftentimes complained about, and for good reason, because if it's not well done, that it's really boring. But if you have, I would argue, the Agatha Christie's or the Sherlock Holmes novels, the characters aren't making interesting choices along the way. They're solving puzzles as they go, but it's still very fascinating and interesting to the audience to consume that experience.
Well, the classic case is Rex Stout's was the Nero Wolf stories, which the mysteries are not actually that amazing. And sometimes they're solved by some guy coming in from outside. Oh, we found this out. But the characters are so interesting of Nero and Archie Goodwin that I just read them for those guys.
You just enjoy it anyway.
And the characters they meet are interesting. And so now in the game, it's hard to make a guy as good as Rex Stout can do, but you can make characters with some depth. And of course, in a board game, I can give some of that depth on the players. So they're the ones blustering and being the bully. And
well, that's the fun thing about games, because you guys are the ones telling the story. The players are the ones creating that experience for each other and themselves. It's a lot of fun.
As where role-playing games get their strength, they can be that Nero Wolf guy, and make decisions that aren't always rational, but make sense for the character, and have fun doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great line to end on. Fantastic. Thank you both very much. Matt, again, your book is bloomfablevine.com is a place to pick it up.
I also just remembered we just started a new podcast called Plot Armor Online, where we talk about, writing and interview authors and stuff like that too. So
okay, Plot Armor Online on sort of the regular podcast channels?
Yeah, everywhere you can normally find podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, X, we're getting to Facebook eventually, but Twitch, all the places. So
fantastic. And if someone wants to be apprised of when Hyperspace comes out,
we're going to plug it all over the world when it comes out. But in the meantime, you can get hints and stuff on it and downloadable STLs.
Yeah,
if you have
the print minis
from Sandy of Cthulhu, one word on Patreon,
which is a Patreon.
You do have to spell Cthulhu right.
Yeah.
So good luck with that. But there's essays and game stuff and cool. We have an STL of Cthulhu flying through space, so that's pretty cool.
And won't be back up and play a session sometime.
I think that'd be fantastic.
I think that would be a lot of fun.
That'd be fun. Yeah, do a 90-minute game. I'm up for it. Might have to fight Tony Dan.
First time you play it might be 2 hours.
That's all right.
I can handle that.
Take a little longer first time because you're
right.
You're learning stuff.
You're learning.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you both, and thank you all very much. It's been an episode of the Gopherwood Lounge. Remember, the humans, notwithstanding H.P. Lovecraft, the humans win in the end.